our connection to this whole complex structure is Shakyamuni Buddha, this man who lived in India 2,500 years ago. And he's sharing this teaching in our world because this is what we need to hear. This is what we need to hear. And he's telling it to his disciple Ananda. Ananda was another sort of significant aspect about Ananda as a disciple of the Buddha is that he never became enlightened in the Buddha's lifetime. The Buddha's other major important disciples all were arhats. They were all enlightened disciples. So they heard the Buddha's teachings, they followed those teachings, and they became enlightened as a result of it. During the Buddha's lifetime, Ananda was the only major disciple of the Buddha for whom that was not the case. So, a little side note, after the Buddha was gone, people were beginning to disagree and have disputes about what he had actually taught, and they said, okay, we've got to get everybody together and set the record straight. So let's gather all the arhats. So get all the arhats together, and they say, and we need somebody who heard all the teachings. Well, that's Ananda. But Ananda isn't enlightened. He's not an arhat. So he's not in the arhat club. He can't come to this meeting. They said, Ananda, we need you to be at this meeting. We need you to be enlightened by tomorrow morning. And so what does Ananda do? He goes back to his little, his little mat, and he sits down, and he, sets his mind to it, and sure enough, in the early hours of the morning, Ananda becomes enlightened, realizes enlightenment, and he arrives at, this is called the first council, the first gathering, and as soon as he walks in, he did it, he's enlightened. And they seat him in the chair of honor, and then he proceeds to share these teachings that he received from the Buddha. And he then provides all of our sutras. They begin with this phrase, thus I have heard, and that's a reference to Ananda, the way that he began the retelling of the sutras. Thus I have heard. I heard the Buddha say this. He was in this place, at this time, such and such people were there, and these were the circumstances, and he tells the sutras. But at the time of the telling of the larger sutra, Ananda was not enlightened. So the Buddha is providing a teaching specifically for Ananda, for someone who's not enlightened. Many of the Buddha's sermons were given to enlightened disciples. He's having two enlightened people having a conversation. In this case, the larger sutra is for someone who is yet to realize awakening. And so, for me, personally, I'm not enlightened. I can't speak for any of you, but for me, that makes this very significant. And that makes me turn my ears to this teaching and say, what does the Buddha have to say for someone like me? What does he want to say to someone like me who is yet to be enlightened? What does he want to tell me about this world that I live in and the realm that I should aspire to? And that's expressed here in these 48 vows. So I read many of these vows as a critique of human society. And sadly, it hasn't changed in the last 2,500 years. I believe the things that are rejected here are still problems that we face as human beings, sadly. But and I think we see it a lot. Let's see, in the interest of moving through the material, I want to touch on just one more. Michael, could I ask you to read number 35?
Gender discrimination.
Yeah.
When I attained Buddhahood, the woman throughout the countless and inconceivable Buddha worlds in the 10 quarters, having heard my name, will rejoice in interesting heart, awaken the mind of aspiring for enlightenment, and wish to renounce the state of being women. If, after the end of their lives, they should be born as women, may I not attain perfect enlightenment.
Thank you. So, this is in some ways problematic if you read it. I see some of our women here kind of nodding and I don't know how to take this. And to me, the way to read this is again as a critique of human society, of the tendency of human beings, which is to regrettably, throughout history, to treat women in an unequal fashion. In many cases, in the time of the Buddha, we can only imagine what the status of women might have been like. I mean, if we look to modern day societies, many women, not just in India, but there are some women in modern day India who live in very, very difficult circumstances. Here in this country, we have women suffering from inequality. And if it is this case now, with all of our sort of movements and empowerments and understandings, we can imagine that the time of the Buddha, again, this was a real problem. And so the way to read this is not, for me, as a specific rejection of femininity, but rather as a critique or rejection of the way women have been treated, and specifically citing women, and this is something that Honen and Shindong do, specifically citing women because the tendency would be to exclude women if they're not specifically included. If you didn't say, and women too, then people would say, oh yeah, but this is only for men. This is only for men. In many cases, if people would read something and say, oh well, of course this is just intended for men. If it would have meant to include women, then it would have specifically mentioned women. That's regrettably a way in which people have, throughout the history of human civilization and throughout the history of Buddhism in many cases, have argued. And so this sutra, in that regard, is a treasure because it specifically includes women. And Honen and Shinran really pick that up and say, yes, this is a teaching specifically that includes women, and so it brings men and women up onto the same level. And so that's the way that I read this. And I think this is something that we need to look at and we need to think about. What does this mean? And understand this, rather than, ooh, this is not that comfortable. Let's just include 10 and we'll just skip to 41, And in some of our own translations, we have it here, in the Junidai, I'm on tape here, so if I'm not a minister next week, you'll know why. So in the translation of the Junidai here in this Purple Gatha book, and I don't believe this was developed, that this specific translation was done by intentionally by the person who organized this. There's a line in the Junidai. Hi son bu setsu mu akumyo yakunin myo ni akudofu shunin shi shin hyo hi son ko ga chorai mida son. The way in which they interpret that in this volume is, no words of evil are in his land, no fear of evildoers nor evil paths. With sincere heart all beings worship him, thus I prostrate myself before Amida Buddha. The way that I would translate that is, no words of evil are in his land. There is no fear of being born as a woman or of falling into the evil paths. So this word nyoni means woman, and so this is a sticky thing, and we've chosen up to this point to say, yeah, that's not going to go over well. So it's sort of glossed over, but I feel that it would be better to provide what I feel would be a faithful translation, and then to have a conversation about this idea. This is part of our tradition. How has this been interpreted and embraced over the years? Within the context of these vows and the larger meaning of them, rejecting our foolishness, turning our minds toward the awakened mind of the Buddha, rejecting our tendency toward gender discrimination. We've got some heavy lifting. Make sure there are men coming, right? We're going to have to set up tables. Make sure there are men coming. Oh, we're going to have to serve some tea. Make sure that the women are there, right? That's kind of, in some ways the culture of our temples that's still there. Well, men can serve tea, and I know plenty of women who can schlep tables if need be. So, I think that this is a part of our tradition. So I wanted to just touch on that and talk about that as another example of how the wisdom of the Buddha, I think, is reflected in the vows. So and then there's another, number 41 is a similar language, talking about individuals with physical disabilities and the social status in 43. And I would read them in the same way, not as a rejection of people with disabilities, but rather a rejection of the discrimination that those people have faced. So let's move on and look at what is affirmed now. And this is, in a sense, the real meat of the vows. So I think looking at the time, and in order to really give ourselves an opportunity to look into Shindong's interpretations, I'd like to skip down to number 11, and these are the ones, so the ones that we've talked about up to this point have really dealt with what we would think of as our everyday society, and things about that which are rejected from the wisdom of the Buddha. The vows that Shindong really focuses on are talking about the realization of enlightenment, of realizing this enlightened mind. How is that done? And affirming that the Nembutsu is that path. And so we're sort of shifting gears a little bit and getting, sort of stepping up a level into the more rarefied atmosphere of the enlightened realm, which becomes a little more abstract, but I think it's Jodo Shinshu fundamental, so we're going to spend some time looking on that. So I'd like to begin by going through these in the order in which they appear, in the order of the 48 vows, and then look at them a little more closely in terms of the order in which Shinran Shonin emphasizes them in his Kyogyo Shinsho. So let's see. Mrs. May, I can't read your
Rosalie.
Rosalie, okay. Yes. Could I ask you to read number 11, please, on page 3?
If, when I attain Buddhahood, the humans and devas in my land should not dwell in the stage of the truly settled and necessarily attain nirvana, may I not attain the perfect enlightenment.
Okay, thank you. So this is affirming that this Pure Land, so these 48 vows, they describe what we call the Pure Land. This is where it becomes clear that birth in the Pure Land is realization of nirvana. Again, back to the Four Noble Truths, that the cessation of suffering is realized through nirvana. Nirvana is number 3 of the Four Noble Truths. And so it's right here in the 11th vow, that birth in the Pure Land is to be born in the Pure Land is to realize nirvana. So again, Shakyamuni Buddha pointing us to this and providing this narrative framework as a way of conveying this teaching to us in a way that can resonate with us, in a way that has tremendous depth. There's tremendous depth to this teaching and to the way in which it's expressed for people living in our world. So let's carry on and look at vows 12 and 13. So let's see, Matt, could I ask you to read both 12 and 13 if you would.
Okay. Amida Buddha's infinite light, basis for the chapter on the true Buddha and land. 12. If, when I attain Buddhahood, my light should be finite, not illuminating even 100,000 kotis of nayutas of Buddha lands, may I not attain the perfect enlightenment.
Thank you. And 13 too, please.
Amida Buddha's infinite light, basis for the chapter on the true Buddha and land. 13. If, when I attain Buddhahood, my life should be finite, limited even to 100,000 kotis of nayutas of kalpas, may I not attain the perfect enlightenment.
Thank you. So this is this is where we get the name for this Buddha. This is the kind of Buddha I'm going to become. So this is significant. Most of the other vows talk about the land. What is this place going to be like? What is Minnesota going to be like? And the beings who dwell there. What are Minnesotans going to be like? What are these strange people going to be like? So what are these very special people of the Pure Land going to be like? These two vows talk specifically about this Buddha that I am going to become. Amida. So this Amida is made up of Amida Buddha. So this word Amida is made up of two parts, right? So A means not, or it's a negative prefix. We have some of this in English, like the word atypical. We say something is atypical, it's not typical. The word apathetic, lacking pathos, not caring, right? So not and mida also is a kind of cognate with English, right? Meter, to measure something, right? A meter is an instrument of measuring. So not able to be metered, immeasurable. And there are two aspects of Amida that are immeasurable. I apologize. The light and the life. Right? So this is the 12th and the 13th bow. What kind of Buddha am I going to be? A Buddha of immeasurable light and life. And the light represents wisdom. You think about if the room is dark, you can't see what's there, right? You don't see what's there. Turn on the lights, you can see clearly what is really there. That's wisdom, the light shining. Life is compassion. You think of somebody who's always there for you, right? A parent. A parent, although may get annoyed with their children, may get frustrated with their children, they don't stop loving their children. They don't stop caring about their children. They have this presence there. And that's the life of the Buddha. So this immeasurable time, consistency over time is expressed as the Buddha's compassion. So that's the kind of Buddha I'm going to be. Immeasurable light, boundless wisdom, immeasurable light, boundless compassion. For Shindong, it's very significant. Okay. Let's carry on then. Let's see, let's just over here to Mr. Marsh. Where are you going? Oh, you're Mr. Mark. You're Mr. Kato. Okay.
The Nimbus basis for the chapter on practice 17. If when I attain Buddhahood, the countless Buddhas throughout the worlds and the 10 quarters should not all glorify and praise my name, may I not attain the perfect enlightenment.
Okay, right. So this specific vow is where we get this praising and saying the name of the Buddha. That's what we do, right? Namo Amida Butsu. We're praising and saying the name of Amida Buddha. So it comes right here from the 48 vows, this practice of the Nembutsu. So this is the practice that is provided by Dhammapada Bodhisattva, by Amida Buddha. He goes on then to become Amida Buddha through the fulfillment of these vows. And then we come to say the name of this Buddha, Amida Buddha, Namo Amida. Okay, and then let's read, who gets to read the 18th vow? Now, Mr. Mark.
In
in trusting in Amida Buddha, other power, Nembutsu, basis for the chapter on Shinji. If, when I attain Buddhahood, the sentient beings of the 10 quarters who, with sincere and entrusting heart, aspire to be born into my land and say my name even 10 times, should not be born there, may I not attain the perfect enlightenment. Excluded are those who commit the 5 grave offenses and those who slander the right Dharma.
Okay, thank you. And then I would like to ask Eric to read in the footnote number 9, if you could read Shindong's interpretation for us. So in the footnotes you see I've provided Shindong's interpretations, and what these are is they're from 2 different translations. So the translations in the main body of the handout are from this, the Honganji translation of the larger sutra. The translations in the footnotes are from the collected works of Shindong. Collected works of Shindong. So Shindong has a particular way of reading the ambiguity that exists in the classical Chinese. So Shindong, like all East Asian Buddhists of his time, dealt with the sutras in classical Chinese. Now, classical Chinese is a beautiful language, but not a language like English or Sanskrit in which precision is prized. It's a language with ambiguity, and that's the multiplicity of meaning is one of the beauties and one of the things that's celebrated about the Chinese language. And so if you have a string of Chinese characters, like the string that makes up the 18th bow, there are different ways in which you can read those characters and interpret the relationship between them. And so the Honganji translation provides what we might say would be an orthodox reading based on the conventions of reading classical Chinese, as agreed upon by Buddhist scholars over the century. Shindong's way of reading is a little unconventional. It's a little unconventional. So it's rooted in his appreciation and encounter with the Nembutsu. It's rooted in a sense, you might say, although I'm not a fan of using the word experience, but in his experience of the Nembutsu as his referent for his interpretation. So let's also, particularly with the 18th bow, look at Shindong's interpretation. This is footnote 9, if you would, Eric.
Compare Shindong's reading. If when I attain Buddhahood, the sentient beings of the 10 quarters, with sincere mind and trusting themselves, aspiring to be born in my land, and say my name perhaps even 10 times, should not be born there, may I not attain supreme enlightenment. Excluded are those who commit the 5 grave offenses, and those who slander the right Dharma. Collected Works of Shindong, page 8.
Okay. So if we look at Shindong's specific reading of this vow, he really emphasizes this entrusting as the condition for birth in the Pure Land. Yes, Eric?
Okay, what happens if you have a person who is disabled and cannot say his name? Does that person be excluded?
No. I would say no, and I don't know anyone who would say no. The important matter is to have this encounter with compassion, and for those who live in the world of speech, then the natural effect. There's a cause and effect. The cause is this encounter with the great compassion expressed in this teaching, this compassion of Shakyamuni Buddha, compassion of this character of Dharmakara Bodhisattva and Amida Buddha. To encounter that in some way in one's life. And then once it's fully and deeply encountered, once you fully and deeply experience and realize something, then your whole being is transformed. What you say, what you do changes. So the Nembutsu, for us, is an expression of this change that's taken place in our hearts. It comes out. And we're given these words, Namo Amida Butsu, as a kind of crystallization for us, provided by the Buddha for this experience. Now, if we take an extreme case of a person who is severely disabled, not living in the world of discursive language, maybe not able to see, not able to hear, there are people in that circumstance. Those people are still receiving kindness and compassion in their lives, and they have some response to that, and that perhaps transforms them. And it's that moment of being transformed by kindness and understanding that is what this is talking about. So for those of us who live in this world of words and language, then we have Namo Amida Butsu, we have this expression to wrap our minds around. But if we're not, if someone isn't in this world, and I'm not saying beneath this world, but just they're not in this world, they can still experience the reality that this is pointing to, this boundless compassion that's embodied in what we talk about when we say Buddha. And so I think that this teaching is wonderful because it's completely embracing. It talks about specifically, which was it, the 41st vow, that specifically refers to people with disabilities. I think it's a specific, again, I read that as a specific inclusion of all beings. So these 5 vows that I've kind of set in bold here on my handout, these are specifically identified by Shindong as the vows of true reality. These kind of the most of the 48. Shinran pulls these out and says, these are where the real heart of this teaching is. The other 43 are significant in their support and they flesh out the meaning, but it's all captured actually just in number 18. Really is a crystallization of this whole teaching, this whole narrative is crystallized for Shinran in number 18. The vow that it's this very simple yet very difficult process of entrusting and then being transformed in a way that one says the Nembutsu, that results in realizing this great benefit of these. So I want to talk a little bit about the Jodo Shinshu now. And so there are others that are very significant. The 19th and 20th and the 22nd are of great importance as well. But I think in the interest of time, we'll have to leave that for another day. So now I'd like to turn to the last page of the handout, page 6 here. And this is this. Let me see what happened. So the title, I had a little bit of a formatting issue, as you can see. So it says this title begins on the bottom of page 5. The Vows of Dharmakara Bodhisattva in Shinran's True Teaching, Practice, and Realization of the Pure Land Way. The Jodo Shinshu. The Jodo Shinshu was written by Shindong Shonin, and it is his very careful, very deliberate explication of this Pure Land teaching based on scriptural sources. So this is an English translation of everything that is agreed upon as the significant writings of Shindong Shonin, including letters, his wasan, all of that he wrote. The Kyogyo Shinsho, or the true teaching, practice, and realization, is this much of what he wrote in his life. So if you look at it, it's about half of everything that he wrote is in this. And it's his major life's work, and this is the foundation for the Jodo Shinshu teaching. If we look at the one way to approach the Jodo Shinshu teaching, one of my good friends, Reverend Michael Conway, who's Dr. Reverend Michael Conway, who's a professor at Otani University, was here in the spring talking we had this gathering of Nishi and Higashi ministers, and I had the opportunity to hear him give a talk about Kyogyo Shinsho, and he talked about one of the significant teachers in his tradition described reading the Kyogyo Shinsho as walking through a dark forest, and each of the passages is like a tree in the forest, and so you're sort of coming to the forest and you come to a tree and you sort of admire the tree, and then you kind of walk and you come upon another tree. But there are all of these scriptural passages, and it ties together to create this beautiful, rich forest of meaning. But it can be overwhelming if you just... Has anybody here ever sat down and read the Kyogyo Shinsho cover to cover? Yes? How was that? How did that go for you?
It's taken me 2 semesters.
It's taking you 2 semesters, right? And your head is reeling, right? You know, it's dense, and he's citing all of these, of course, from the sutras, the 3 Pure Land sutras, but a vast body of different sutras, commentators, all sorts of different things. And so in order to appreciate it, you need to take a step back a bit. And one of the ways to do that is to look at the organization of the chapters of the Kyogyo Shinsho. And so that's what we have here on page 6 is, in a sense, a very simple outline of what Shindong identifies as the basis. I saw a few of you have your copies of the CWS with you. If you look in the CWS, at the start of the chapters of the Kyogyo Shinsho, so if you open it up and you can pick any chapter of the Kyogyo Shinsho, and on the right side page you have the title in big letters, and then the beginning of the text, and on the left page there's a kind of small writing at the top. So this is the chapter on practice here, and on the left-hand side it said, "The vow that all the Buddhas say the name, the true practice of the Pure Land Way, the practice selected in the primal vow." And so, for each of the chapters of the Kyogyo Shinsho, Shindong has selected 1 or 2 of the vows of Bodhisattva Dharmakara to be the basis for that chapter. So these vows really provide the structure, the underpinning, the fundamental perspective, I keep tripping over this, of the Kyogyo Shinsho, which is the Shinran's most systematic organization of his teachings. So, if we look, chapter 1, the true teaching of the Pure Land Way. Chapter 1 identifies specifically the larger sutra. So rather than one specific vow, although chapter 1 is often associated with the 17th vow, Shinran says the larger sutra of immeasurable life. So he's saying this sutra, of all the vast number of teachings that Shakyamuni Buddha delivered in his lifetime, this is the one that is most important for me, most significant for understanding the Nembutsu. Then chapter 2, the true practice. What do you do? What is the practice? Shinran identifies the 17th vow, to say the name, Namo Amida Butsu. And Shinran dedicates that chapter on practice to talking about the Nembutsu and this practice of saying the name. Chapter 3, Shinjin, the mind of true and trusting. Again, this is based on Shinran's somewhat unique reading of the 18th vow, but that the important matter is this entrusting. Entrusting is the matter. And this practice and Shinjin, they're tied together. This Nembutsu and Shinjin are very closely intertwined. Then chapter 4, the chapter on realization, he says the 11th vow. It is in the 11th vow that we have this affirmation that birth in the Pure Land is the realization of nirvana, is the realization of awakening and enlightenment. And then he also talks about the 22nd vow as well. And the 22nd vow is the vow that once one is born into this perfect land, you don't just chill out and enjoy yourself and relax, but rather naturally you have this sense of compassion, wanting to come back and to help others, this returning to the world. And that's affirmed in the 22nd vow. Chapter 5, the chapter on the Buddha in the land, and affirming that these are true and authentic expressions of the Buddha's awakening, and that's there in the 12th and the 13th vow. And then chapter 6 is a kind of a clarifying, let's say, of some matters of confusion. And he talks about the 19th and the 20th vow. There, the 19th vow is associated in Shinran's writings with kind of mixed self-power practice. I'm going to do it on my own, or I'm going to do all kinds of different things that are going to result in my birth in the Pure Land, which is also expressed here in these 48 vows. Then the 28th vow is understood as this: I'm going to say the Nembutsu a whole bunch, and by saying Naman Babu, Naman Babu, Naman Babu a million times, I'll be born in the Pure Land. Also, something that one could infer from the sutras. And Shinran then takes this time in the 6th chapter to say that those are possible interpretations, but the real and authentic understanding from Shinran's point of view is the 18th vow. That it's really getting to this point of entrusting, that transformation, that shift, change of heart that is then manifested as the Nembutsu that results in the birth in the Pure Land. So for me, I think if we want to talk about the fundamentals of Jodo Shinshu, we really have to get into the vows. And I think in order to understand the vows, we have to look at them in this larger context. Sometimes we just say, oh, we're going to study the vows, but we have to think about how it is situated in this larger narrative structure. This is something that Shakyamuni Buddha told Ananda. That this is the way this has been passed down to us. He's rooted in history and then told in the context of this larger narrative structure, this conversation between the Buddha, the aspiring bodhisattva, Dharmakara, and what he aspired to realize, and then the affirmation that that was realized. That's in the second portion of the larger sutra. The significant vows are specifically pointed out, and Ananda says, so you have this build-up, this plot build-up, and Ananda says, did he do it? Did he do it? Did it happen? And Shakyamuni Buddha says, yes, yes he did. He is called Amida Buddha. And, you know, it's been 10 kalpas since this realization occurred, and as a result of that those who entrust in the Buddha and say the name, they are all born in the Pure Land. This happens. So Shakyamuni Buddha is affirming that this narrative and saying, yes, the realization has been fulfilled. So I'll conclude by reading the verse on the fulfillment of the primal vow. I think that would be a nice way to kind of end here. So I invite you to join me in brush. When sentient beings, upon hearing the Buddha's name, realize an entrusting heart and joy with even a single thought of the Buddha, direct their merits with sincere mind, and aspire to be born in that land, they then all attain birth in that land and dwell in the stage of non-retrogression. Excluded are those who commit the 5 grave offenses and those who slander the right Dharma. Nam Dal, it's Nam.